Okay, members, can I welcome you this morning? Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting? And at the beginning, can I provide a brief overview of the day's business? Today, the committee will consider subordinate legislation, a departmental briefing on the proposal for subsidy for NI water, a briefing by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, whole life carbon assessment. Can I also advise members that due to witnesses and some members joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to ask questions at each agenda item. And just the members present, we also have Cara Hunter joining us online, Andrew Muir and now Cathal Boylan. Okay, members, could I also ask that you mute mics if you're online? When you're not speaking, that would allow everyone to follow the evidence and follow the meeting. Could I advise members of the need to vacate the room at 12 noon at the latest, and request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. So agenda item number 1, which is apologies. Have we got any apologies? Don't? Okay. Don't see anybody indicating. Okay, agenda item number 2, which is chairperson's business, and we have members that weren't there. We have wrote to Wrightbus to thank them for their hospitality and visit to the Ballymena site. It was very, very useful for the committee to attend, and publicly on the record I've thanked them. And just for those members that were there, I'm sure they found it very, very useful. And certainly it's going to be a big part of deliberations and conversations going forward, in particular in relation to electric and excitingly with the hydrogen element as well. So I'd just like to thank them publicly. Could also inform members that a request for information under FOI was received by the staff for correspondence considered by the committee during and regarding to the development in the countryside plan. The information was collated and issued to the individual. Agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes. At page 6, draft minutes of the meeting on the 17th of November 2021. Are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting? Members agreed? I don't see anybody dissenting. Agreed, yes? Great. Okay, thank you, members. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 4, which is matters arising. Could I turn members' attention to page 14, matters arising from the meeting on the 17th of November 2021. Okay, members. Are members content that our members have any issues arising from the meeting on the 17th? Anybody have any issues to raise? No. Okay, members. Also, just I suppose I would put note, I know we did discuss about the format in which our stakeholder engagement would take place. I do know that I am receiving some private emails from some of those that asked for stakeholder engagement. I know they're included in the piece, but it would be useful. I don't know if that has already been done, if somebody has been able to go back to let them know of what format we're doing and who's involved with that. I haven't responded to them yet because I wanted to collate exactly what we were doing first. Okay, agenda item number 4 again. So could members look at page 17, which is outstanding committee requests for information. Okay, members, you can see there for yourselves the Executive Office, 2 pieces, and the ESB. We'll come on to ESB shortly because it is the correspondence from them. Members content? Content, okay. Draw members' attention to agenda item number 5, to the correspondence memo at page 36 of your packs. Okay. Draw members' attention to page 40, which is correspondence from the Department for Infrastructure regarding its intention to publish a consultation paper that will contain proposals to make careless driving a fixed penalty notice. And I'm not sure if I have to, but I will at this stage just to declare membership of the Policing Board. Who will have an input to that consultation. Okay, do members wish to discuss, would we prefer to have a briefing from the department in relation to that before, or wait until the consultation is closed to hear maybe a fuller picture as to what's involved? I see Cathal Boylan. Go ahead, Cathal.
Yes, Chair. I think we need a briefing, to be honest. I mean, just to get a clear view of where it's going. Can you hear me right, Chair? Yeah.
maximize. Sorry, just hold on a moment, Cahill. Would you maximise the screen? I think you can do it from your mouse now.
No, I can't.
Okay, don't worry. No, sorry, it's just a technical issue. Cahill, do you think we should have a briefing before the consultation?
I think so, Chair. I mean, it's an important one that there. I think just want to get a clear overview of where we're going in terms of the consultation. So I'd prefer to have a briefing, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, that's Cahill is suggesting a briefing before the consultation closed. The members agree with that approach? Agree.
Content?
Yeah.
Content? Okay. Okay, members are content. At page 75, members will see a response from the Minister for Infrastructure to issues raised from the meeting on the 3rd of November. Members will see in relation to some very, very useful statistics from DVA, and we do appreciate him coming forward with that. It will certainly help us in our ongoing scrutiny and the commitment to continually publish them and provide them to the committee. We'll also see an update in relation to roads resurfacing. Members will know that the Minister did say that the inquiry report that she had launched within her department in relation to this is due to be published, so it would be useful perhaps it would be useful that I know we do have the Minister in for a briefing. I think it's next week or the week after.
She's had to decline.
She's declined that invitation.
Well, she was in for the 15th, but there's going to be an all-executive event on the 15th on the morning of the meeting.
Well, I think what we could do, members, is issue the committee's desire to see at the earliest opportunity that report to see actually what did go wrong into these roads resurfacing contracts, because I think it's important that the committee have a full and up-to-date picture, particularly pertaining to those areas and those council areas that have suffered greatly from that, particularly in the west. Roy, you wanted to come in?
In terms of the MOT testing statistics, which were referred to in the correspondence memo, there's a couple of aspects of it which I think are worthy of further investigation and discussion. The first one is that the press release was saying about how there's been an increase in testing, but in fact we're still testing fewer cars than 2019. So we're not actually meeting demand, and there's been increased requirement for MOTs, increased older cars on the road. But secondly, it's been drawn to my attention that there's huge variation in the success rate at different MOT centres. And in particular, the only one near myself, Larne, is very low, and I've actually picked up from several mechanics that they are stopping using it because they feel that it is harder to get your MOT through that particular test centre than others. So why is there? The question is, why is there huge variation in testing between the different centres? You would expect all mechanics to understand what the requirement is, and there to be a roughly similar success rate at individual centres, but that is clearly not the case.
Okay, no, I think it's a valid point. I think I think it was actually you maybe that requested it, Roy, for this delving in statistics from the department. So I think that's been helpful in us getting a fuller picture. I think that the hard thing has been when DVA have come to the committee, it's been very difficult to get behind the broad headline statistics. So we're eventually getting somewhere on that, I believe. We have said in our forward work programme and our committee priorities that the continual backlog with DVA is something that the committee will want to keep attention to. So I would imagine what we could do, and I would certainly, if members would agree, that we could write to DVA in relation to that particular surrounding the variation between different test centres, but it's also something that we could raise whenever we do have them back before the committee, which, I would assume going forward into the new year that we will have DVA back to give us a further update. So I'm content. Are you content with that action point?
Yep.
Okay. We have Andrew Muir, please.
Thanks. It's in relation to 5.6, the ASB. Do you want to take that later, or do you want to take that now?
Hold on, Andrew.
Yeah, it's just obviously we received the correspondence from ASB in relation to their plans for work on the EV charging network. Also, where there's potential changes coming up in the future, early next year.
Go on ahead, Andrew. I'm happy to take that now because we are in correspondence. Go on ahead.
All right. So I just want to say if it would be possible, maybe we invite ASB to come to the committee meeting early next year just to give us an update in terms of their plans, because there's been quite a lot of announcements recently.
Yeah, we have ASB scheduled for a meeting with the committee, and that's due, so I think it's 15th of December, so it's actually earlier than what you were proposing. So that'll be an opportunity for us to further delve into those serious questions that we have in relation to the charging network. Okay.
Cheers, thanks. Thank you,
Thanks. David Hilditch.
Sure, it's back on the DVA situation, but a different topic, and it's the one that I've been banging on about for a wee while in relation to enforcement. Obviously I missed last week, and apologies for that, but I don't believe they have responded to that issue in relation to a recent court case where they seem to be a wee bit exposed. We did ask them at their last visit here to forward to us some correspondence in relation to their thoughts on that and how maybe lessons would be learned on that. We haven't received it, I take it, and it's maybe time that we put that onto a more formal footing and actually wrote to them for that. I'm not saying they've been dodging the situation, but it's certainly been one that they haven't really been forthcoming on.
No, I think that's a fair point. The issue that you have raised continually, and unfortunately it's always been at the bottom of the agenda when DVA have come in relation to tax or entrapment, and in relation to the ongoing enforcement. Now, the Minister has responded in our correspondence in relation to that, and I'll read for reference. It says, for legal reasons, the DVA cannot comment on any ongoing criminal cases, but is advised that any future ruling against the Department by a court on a particular point of law would have to be properly considered. This would include the consultation with the Public Prosecution Service and, if necessary, seeking legal advice in order to determine any impact on other similar or related cases and DVA's future enforcement approach.
This isn't ongoing, this is finished.
That's what my knowledge is as well. So,
and I think as a scrutiny committee, you can't let something like that just slide on past, because the public they're first of all being potentially entrapped. Also, it's costing thousands of pounds to the public to pay these fines, whereby an ordinary taxi driver will pay a couple of £100 fine before he'll go to court and cost himself several £1,000s.
I think your point's well made, and I think that the department can put a broad brush approach in this here. If there is a particular case that has now finished, that there's lessons to be learnt and things for this committee to know, I think we need to hear them. So I would support that. Are members content that when we do have DVA at our next meeting, and I know it has been a subsection, but we put that well up the agenda for discussion when we do have them in relation to the cases that have now finished in relation to potential entrapment in relation to taxis? Are members content with that? Members are content. Cathal Boylan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just another issue in correspondence in relation to page 77. I mean, there was an external recruitment process for 16 new examiners. Can we just get a timeline on that? Because reading through, if you look at some of the tables, it's 16 and then they're talking about 10 and 11. So can we seek clarification as whether we need 16 new full examiners or not, please?
Yep. No, that's a further point of clarification on the back of the correspondence that we received that we can ask for. Certainly, I'm trying to get my head around some of those figures myself in relation to what has been the actual uplift, because somewhere along the stage there it's just not quite clear. So happy to put that in for an action point. All right, members, so we have covered those broad points. I don't see anybody else indicating. Oh, the one other point, and I don't know whether we raised it at the last meeting or whether it should maybe coming next week, but the committee did put on record its concern regarding driving test backlog in relation to those that have continually booked a test and unfortunately failed that test, and the great economic harm that that's doing to those individuals who are ultimately put to the back of a queue and having to reapply, sometimes having to face this inordinate amount of money in relation to tests in between. And I don't think it's appropriate, and the department haven't come back, and the committee did consider that if it did not hear back from the DVA or the Minister in relation to this, that we would consider a motion. I know members have been broadly supportive of a reserve type list for those individuals. I certainly would, and I think what we will do is we will see whether or not that the Minister comes back or the department come back with an answer to that query next week, and if not, the committee will potentially consider further action. Are members broadly in line with that and content with that approach? Okay. Thanks, members. Okay, we will move on. So members are agreed with the suggested actions in the correspondence memo and what was discussed today. Agreed? Agreed. Thanks, members. We'll now move to agenda item number 6, which is subordinate legislation. SL1s not subject to assembly procedure. Could I advise members that there are 2 proposals for a statutory rule not subject to assembly proceedings at page 82. SL1, the parking and waiting restrictions, Rathryland, Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2021, and SL1, the traffic weight restriction, Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rules? Content? Okay, agenda item number 7, which is SL1, the Ardmillan Gardens Bangor Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Turn members' attention to page 89 of your packs, the SL1. The proposal is subject to negative resolution procedure. The purpose of the rule is to abandon an area of 1.85 square metres of road comprising footway directly adjacent to number 15 Ardmillan Gardens Bangor. The abandonment has been requested by the adjacent resident in order to extend their boundary wall slightly to facilitate more parking in their driveway. There is still a wide footway which serves the public. The Department is of the view that the area of road is not necessary and may be abandoned. The bed and soil of the area of footway in question is owned by a freeholder who has agreed to transfer the small area of land to the resident. The land will be abandoned on completion of works. The Department has consulted on the proposal and there has been no objections. I'm not aware of any objections to that or any controversy surrounding that particular SL1. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Content, thank you. Okay, members, agenda item number 8, which is a departmental briefing on water charges statutory rule.
We have a slight
Sorry, members, hold on a moment.
We have a slight issue. The 3 witnesses have been removed from the meeting somehow.
Okay.
Are having trouble getting reconnected. If you would like to suspend for 5 minutes.
Okay, members, we're going to suspend the meeting for 5 minutes because our guests that are due to present to us have been put out of the meeting, and I think what we need to do is try to find a way to get them back in. So if members could adjourn for 5 minutes and we will reconnect at 23 minutes or 25 past 10. Okay, thanks members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is...
Okay, members, we're back in open session. Can I apologise? We did have some technical issues, but I think we now have them sorted. So again, agenda item number 8, which was the departmental briefing on water charges statutory rule. Can I advise members that Hansard will record the meeting? I'll turn members' attention to page 93, which is the clerk's memo in relation to this statutory rule. At page 94, a briefing paper, proposals to extend the payment of subsidy to NI Water in lieu of water charges. At page 96, the SL1 proposals to extend the payment of subsidy to NI Water in lieu of domestic water charges. Could I advise members that the rule is subject to draft affirmative resolution, and as such it shall not come into operation unless and until approved by the Assembly resolution. To do this, the Minister will bring a motion to the Assembly for debate in the Assembly chamber. The purpose of the briefing this morning is obviously to give members an opportunity to question officials in relation to this statutory rule. So, without further ado, could I welcome attending via Starleaf Mrs Alison Clydesdale, Director of Water and Drainage Policy, Mr Damien Kern, Water and Drainage Policy Division, and Mrs Julianne Dutton, Water and Drainage Policy Division. You're all very, very welcome to the committee this morning. And could I ask that you please begin your presentation? The committee will consider for the proposal for the statutory rule following the departmental briefing. So it's over to you guys. I'm not sure who's leading up in relation to the presentation.
Morning, Chair. It's me. Can I just check that you can hear me okay, just with the technical difficulties we've had this morning?
We can indeed, Alison. Thank you.
Super, great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. Thank you for the invitation to brief the committee this morning. I am joined this morning by Julianne Dutton, Head of the Environment Team, and Damien Curran, Head of the Shareholder Team in Water and Drainage Policy Division. We are here to brief the committee on the proposal set out in the SL1 to extend the period during which the Department for Infrastructure may pay a subsidy to the water and sewerage undertaker in lieu of domestic water charges. Article 213 of the Water and Sewerage Services Northern Ireland Order 2006 provides the power for the Department to make grants to water and sewerage undertakers. You will be aware that it is the current Executive's policy, and indeed the policy of previous Executives, that domestic consumers should not pay a separate charge for water and sewerage services. Instead, this is currently funded through a subsidy paid by DFI to the water and sewerage undertaker, which is, of course, Northern Ireland Water. As you will be aware, at a recent meeting of the Executive, the Minister for Infrastructure secured agreement from her Executive colleagues to continue this policy on domestic water charging and to bring forward the relevant legislation to extend this for a further 5 years so that the subsidy may be paid to the 31st of March 2027. As set out in the SL1 letter, there are several advantages to extending this period by a further 5 years. Namely, it offers the next Executive time to make an informed and planned decision on the future funding of the water industry. If the next Executive decides to continue the current policy, it would allow time to prepare the necessary legislation before the end of the next mandate, and it also allows time for policy research and development should the Executive wish to consider a change to the current policy on domestic water charging. The subsidy to Northern Ireland Water is currently paid under the Grants to Water and Sewerage Undertakers Order Northern Ireland 2017, which currently has an end date for payment of a subsidy of the 31st of March 2022. Therefore, to give effect to the Executive's recent decision to continue this policy on domestic water charging and to bring forward the relevant legislation to extend this for a further 5 years, a new statutory rule is now required. The Department has therefore prepared the SL1, which you have received, and is currently working with the Departmental Solicitor's Office on drafting the Grants to Water and Sewerage Undertakers Order Northern Ireland 2022. This order proposes to extend the timescale during which a subsidy may be paid to NI Water to the 31st of March 2027. As you said, the order will be subject to draft affirmative resolution, and if the committee are content, the statutory rule will be laid as soon as possible and brought before the Assembly for debate in due course. I just wanted to take the opportunity, Chair, to give you some background on the legislative position and how we've got here. When the 2006 order was commenced in April 2007, the initial period during which the subsidy may be paid was 3 years, so that took it to 31st of March 2010. That end date has been amended on several occasions since then by primary legislation. In 2016 then, the Water and Sewerage Services Act Northern Ireland 2016 provided a power to amend this date further by subordinate legislation rather than by primary legislation. At the same time, the bill extended the period by 1 year, as there would not at that time have been adequate time to make the necessary statutory rule in 2016. So therefore, following that, the statutory rule that I referred to earlier was made in 2017, the Grants to Water and Sewerage Undertakers Order Northern Ireland 2017, which amended the end date for the payment of the subsidy at that time to the 31st of March 22. As that date is now fast approaching, it is necessary to make a further piece of subordinate legislation to continue the current policy for a further 5 years, as agreed by the Executive. Members will be aware that Northern Ireland Water is regulated by the utility regulator in Northern Ireland, and it therefore operates according to conditions outlined in its licence. The regulator sets prices through its price control process, which allows Northern Ireland Water to deliver water quality, environmental and customer services objectives at the lowest reasonable overall cost. Northern Ireland Water is classified as a non-departmental public body, as it receives over 50% of its revenue from government subsidy in lieu of direct domestic water charging, and as such all expenditure then scores in government budget. The cost of the subsidy is met by DFI, and for this financial year 21-22, DFI has allocated £132 million of resource funding and £216 million of capital funding. This represents the full level of funding as recommended by the utility regulator for the efficient delivery of water and sewage services in the first year of the new price control, and this is the first year in many years that this has. So we welcome any questions you may have regarding the SL1, which proposes the relevant legislation to give effect to the Executive's recent decision to continue their policy on domestic water charging.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison, for your presentation. I have a number of questions and then I'll open it up to members. So I'm just right in saying that obviously this is the longest period of extension that the Department is going for here, given that it's 5 years. The primary reason for doing so is to more or less fit alongside the legislative time frame in relation to a mandate, that if there is any plan or future changes that it gives adequate time to do so. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So could I ask, how is the subsidy worked out? How is the subsidy worked out? I'm going to just look to my colleague Damien, if he could maybe give you a bird's eye view of that.
Yes, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Chair. Really, the subsidies worked out in agreement with Northern Ireland Water and the utility regulator through the price control process. So the subsidy is effectively payments from Northern Ireland Water in lieu of domestic charging. And there's a subsidy agreement that's drafted between the Department and Northern Ireland Water with agreement for the utility regulator. So clearly there's a methodology and regulation behind how that subsidy is created. It's a methodology that's created in terms of what's affordable for customers to pay, and also what's necessary in terms of deliver water and sewage services in an efficient way. So the core of it is through the regulatory process.
Okay. Does the increase in energy costs have an impact on the subsidy, or the regulator's determination, or other unforeseen costs?
I'll take that. I'll take that. Maybe, Damien. When the regulator worked out this price control, obviously the current rise in costs, I think, which is the first really that we've seen of this magnitude in a generation, really I think at that point wouldn't have been foreseen. Under normal circumstances those costs would have been covered, but this particular rise this year is very unprecedented. Damien, I don't know if you want to add something to that?
Yes, thanks, Alison. Well, costs in terms of power and services that Northern Ireland Water has to deliver. And yeah, costs will increase as a result of the unprecedented increase in power. That will be a read-through to customer charges through the regulatory process. But again, it's something in terms of how much customers get charged, get billed. That's something that has to be agreed with the regulator. There's not sort of an uncapped level of charge that Northern Ireland Water can apply to customers per se. It's something that needs to be agreed with the regulation, and also it needs to be affordable to customers as well.
With NI Water being Northern Ireland's biggest energy consumer, or from an electricity perspective, I suppose probably the committee are always looking at ways in which we can improve that situation. And I suppose it has come to our light in different presentations before today in relation to other matters in relation to renewables that 14.8% of wind curtailment is predominantly at night. And I suppose probably what I would ask in relation to the energy and electricity consumption with NI Water, is there a breakdown of what percentage of that happens during the day compared to the night? Because it seems like that could be a wasted opportunity in relation to driving down electricity costs. You may not have that information to hand, but certainly it would be something that the committee would be interested in.
We wouldn't have that information with us this morning, Chair, but happy to ask NI Water for that for you.
Okay, yes, I think that would be interesting to hear. And finally from me, so you advise that there's no consultation needs to be carried out as there's no detrimental impact on customers, and it has been a policy that the executive has had since 2007. So would ask, I suppose, probably in relation to, it could be argued that there are indirect impacts due to the lack of funding for other services due to the subsidy. So is there any policy to consult the wider public on the matter?
There's no plans at this point to consult the wider public. This isn't. There's no change to the policy. Therefore, that's why the consultation wasn't taken forward. But I'll maybe ask Julianne if she has anything to add on that point.
No, Alison, you're right. Purely because there is no change to policy, it wasn't felt that a consultation was required at this stage. If in the future any change in policy was decided upon or considered, certainly consultation would take place at that stage.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll go to members now for questions. So we'll go first to David Hilders, the Vice Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the delegation for briefing us this morning. I would say that the Democratic Unionist Party are absolutely remaining opposed to the introduction of domestic water charges in Northern Ireland. That position hasn't changed from ourselves. But at the same time, would the officials agree that potentially there's an opportunity for better education in relation to the usage and sensible usage and sustainable water usage going forward, which could help the situation to a degree by introducing some more educational issues there to obviously to put the public aware of what they could do to actually help out here?
Yes, absolutely. In Northern Ireland Water do have an ongoing campaign about water conservation, and I think we saw that particularly during the summer and the period of extreme heat. Damien, have you anything to add in relation to that? Just
before Damien comes in, that's sort of near enough an expected thing every year, and people nearly put the kettle on for that statement coming out. But what I'd be looking for is maybe an ongoing sort of educational programme over 12 months of each year to try and educate and keep the issue to the forefront of people's minds.
Yes, yeah. I'm going to just look to Damien. Chair, I am in post just 2 months or 2 weeks today, actually, so I don't have some of that detail, so I suspect Damien will be able to answer that for you.
No, thanks, Alison. Just to address Mr. Hilditch's question, yes, you might have heard of Northern Ireland Water's Water Bus. This is part of their educational programme that they take out to primary schools and well, certainly pre-COVID. They were very active on that front in terms of visiting schools and trying to, get children involved in terms of the value of water. This whole concept of the value of water is very strong in Northern Water, and it is an ongoing sort of stress on people in terms of, use water responsibly. It is a resource. It is, a resource that's not free to produce. There's plenty of water reserves in Northern Ireland, but it is a cost to produce that and to get that clean drinking water to customers' taps. So yeah, there is a lot of benefits in terms of trying to raise awareness, public awareness of the value of water, and just how precious it is. usage of it is not free. It is a cost to the public purse, and it does need to be used responsibly. And Northern Water is funded through the price control process to take forward certain education activities and make the public aware on that level.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Go now to Cathal Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and you're very welcome. Just a couple of questions, Alison, and you're very, very welcome. Good luck in the role.
Thank you.
Clearly, there's been 4 or 5 changes from 2007 in terms of the dates, in terms of the years. I'm just wondering, why was the difference in years? I mean, could you explain that? You mean you went from 1 to 3, now we're going to 5? Why was that, or can anybody explain why that was?
Yes, I'll maybe just ask Leanne to come in.
So, yes, just a bit of background to it, really. The initial period was 3 years, and that 3 years was then followed on for a further extension by primary legislation, just to retain the same timescale. Then in 2016, as Alison mentioned earlier, we prepared a bill and gave a power at that point to extend the period further by subordinate legislation. And as Alison mentioned, there wouldn't have been time at that point to make the necessary subordinate legislation within the timescale. So there was a 1-year period of extension at that point. Following that, the Minister then in 2017 decided to provide a more lengthy period and to coincide with the Assembly mandates to allow a timescale at the end of or coming towards the end of the period for payment of subsidy, to allow for further legislation to be made, or to allow during that mandate enough time for members to consider if they wanted to make any changes to policy. So it was the 5-year period was put in place at that point, and then at this stage the proposal is to extend it just for a further 5 years, again to coincide with the Assembly mandate timescales.
So now we're going from 22 then to 5 years, because it's up now in March. Is that correct? Yeah, the extension.
Yes.
See, just Julianne, see in terms of could you extend it further than the 5 years, or is it just you're going by the mandate?
It could be extended to whatever timescale the Minister or the Executive would decide. It's executive policy, so the decision really at this point was just to make it a 5-year extension to enable consideration to be given to the policy.
The primary then represents a 5-year period, so through subordinate we could still extend it for another year, say in 27 to 28. So that process still goes on? Yeah, it sounds. And just one final question, I appreciate others have questions. Should the extension be brought forward sooner, or is it just the way you work with the mandate, or is it down to the executive, or what's the process there?
To bring forward this piece of legislation?
Yeah, it could have been extended sooner, yeah. Could you have brought in, like it's extended to 22, it was the 22 and then it's gone on now 5 years. Could you have brought it in?
Well, the legislation currently states that the subsidy may be paid up until the 31st of March 2022. Yeah. So there's no need to bring anything further forward until towards the end of that period. Year. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
no, appreciate it. Now. Okay, thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Cathal, we can now go to Cara Hunter.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome here today, and thank you very much for your briefing. I found it very useful. I wonder if I could just ask a more broader question around water and drainage, and looking at the NI Water current funding situation. I understand that the shortfall this year is significant, and that will have serious consequences. Can officials maybe give us just a bit more understanding around that situation and what it will mean? Thank you.
Thanks. The situation has arisen really primarily because of the rising energy costs, and with that funding gap, if the funding gap is not met, then as the Minister outlined in the Chamber on Monday, there potentially would be have to be a cut in services. But finance colleagues in the Department are working closely with both Northern Ireland Water and colleagues in the Department of Finance, and indeed I think next week our finance colleagues are due to brief you, so hopefully they'll be able to give you a more updated position then.
Thank you, Alison, and good luck in your new role as well. And I completely agree, and hopefully as a committee we can work alongside yourself and the Minister in finding a resolve for this issue. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cara. Can we now go to Roy Beggs, please, for a question?
Again, thanks for the briefing so far. But the absence of sewage capacity in many areas is restricting development in terms of private housing and public housing. Yet there is a PC21 business plan to try and put that capacity back in place. So during that PC21 period of planning, the capital investment is to virtually double from 249 million to 463 million. So my question is, has the executive agreed to fund that and correct this omission of not having sufficient sewage capacity, which is actually adversely affecting not only people's lives but the local economy?
I'll start off and then I'll hand over to Damien. I do know within PC21 there is an allocation to address some of the difficulties with the capacity in the sewage network. Obviously at the moment we just have a one-year budget settlement and we're moving into a period that's a multi-year, so that obviously will be helpful. Damien can probably give you some of the detail, maybe perhaps on the figures around that element of the funding.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Well, I would imagine the committee will be aware of what stage we're at in relation to budget bids over the next period. So we're looking at a multi-year budget settlement. And in terms of how we advise and inform Minister and Executive and Department of Finance colleagues in relation to the numbers around that, we use as a baseline the utility regulators PC21 final determination. So that gives us, as a department, the numbers that Northern Ireland Water will require to run and deliver, those capital investments and those wastewater, capacity improvements that the members outlined. So we use the numbers in the PC21 final determination as like the baseline for our bids over this multi-year budget requirement, and then we feed those into the spreadsheets and the system and effectively wait for decisions to be made in terms of what way a multi-year budget settlement is going to be issued. So it's certainly sort of data-driven at this point in terms of how we advise the executive and the assembly in relation to what's required over the next lot of years to deliver the capacity improvements that's required. What's needed really are decisions in relation to this commitment for a multi-year funding settlement, and then when we get those decisions, that gives Northern Ireland Water really the greater flexibility to put in plans for a multi-year, some of the really major scale, capital investments, big, asset delivery projects. Multi-year funding so important for that long-term planning, just to give security of supply of funding to contractors, to Northern Ireland Water, to give them surety of delivery as well. So that's where we're at this point. I think we're still waiting on decisions in relation to this multi-year funding package and what it looks like.
Maybe if I could just add, Chair, as well, probably in relation to the capacity issues around the sewage network, it's probably a sustained level of investment over multiple price controls in order to resolve the issues.
I'm just seeking clarity. When do you think the draft, there will be clarity in terms of the draft budget so that we'll know whether or not this issue has been dealt with or being ignored?
Our finance colleagues who are up to brief you next week will have more detail on that. I wouldn't be able to give you any dates at this point in time, but hopefully next week when you're receiving a briefing on comfort over monitoring, they should be able to hopefully have more information in regard to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We now go down to Muir for a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the officials for joining us this morning. There's a couple of issues just arising from this. More policy issues really for the Minister rather than for officials, and obviously that can be discussed and debated within the Chamber when this comes. I think for me, as commentary around this, obviously Northern Ireland Water are facing a funding crisis at the present moment in time as a result of the increased energy costs, and it is vital that that is resolved because the implications, if that's not resolved, are very, very serious. And I know that officials have touched upon that, and we can engage in due course with officials when they come from finance in the department. Just two things. Previously, many years ago, there was a hypothecation in relation to rates bills, which would have detailed the amount of money that was going from your domestic and rates bills, probably also non-domestic, to be honest, and what that was going towards water and sewage, and then that would have been able to link in with what's been outlined here. Is that something that is being considered as part of this, in terms of, we've been very clear where the revenue streams are coming from this? And then the other one is, obviously this has been made for 5 years, but does this preclude any changes to the governance model for within Northern Ireland Water prior to the end of this?
I'll start off and look to others to add in. In relation to the rates bill, my understanding, just as I say, after 2 weeks in post, is that currently at the moment that wouldn't be possible. And in relation to the 5 years, no, the legislation is there to allow the subsidy to be paid anytime up to March 2027. So if in the next mandate, if obviously that executive decided to look at an alternative funding model, then that would need to be brought in. That would probably take a number of years to do that.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I've seen no other members indicating, so without any further ado, I thank our officials for their presentation, and now I will move on with the committee consideration. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Consideration of the SL1. So the SL1 proposals to extend the payment of subsidy to NI Water in lieu of domestic water charges. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Provided the issue is addressed and not just pushed down the line.
Yeah. No, I think the point's made. As members will know, there will be a full debate on this and a motion from the Minister to the Assembly, and also obviously further follow-up questions in relation to questions that will be asked when whenever the Department of Finance give us their briefing in relation to the finance officials give their briefing in relation to the questions that Mr. Beggs raised, and also they come back in relation to energy questions from myself. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Okay. Thank you, members. We will now move to agenda item number 9, which is the briefing by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. I'll turn members' attention to page 99, RICS briefing paper, Whole Life Carbon Assessment, Lessons and Opportunities for Northern Ireland. And can I welcome attending via Starleaf, everyone in, yes, Mr. Emmett McDonough-Brown, RICS Senior Public Affairs Officer, Northern Ireland, and Mr. Matthew Collins, RICS Senior Specialist, Construction and Infrastructure. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome to committee this morning. And without further ado, could I ask you please to present to the committee, followed by questions.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's really our privilege to be with you this morning to talk about the whole life carbon assessments. I am going to give 1 or 2 slides just by way of introduction about RCS, and then pass over to my colleague Matthew Collins, who is the Senior Specialist for Construction and Infrastructure Management. So, who we are. RICS is a global professional body for chartered surveyors. We promote and enforce the highest standards in the valuation, management and developments of land, real estate, construction and infrastructure. We protect the interests of the public and work across governments around the world to deliver a single international standard. What separates us from other professional bodies is that we are also a regulator of our members, and we provide an independent, risk-based regulation of the profession in the public interest. And our regulatory model applies globally to all individual members of the profession and all RICS regulated firms. So by assuring and when necessary enforcing our standards through our independent disciplinary process, we support consumer confidence and a vibrant profession. And our members operates in the main areas of land, construction, infrastructure and property. And in Northern Ireland, we have over 1,700 members working across those disciplines. Our members work across all stages of the asset life cycle, so from the inception and delivery of projects to their decommissioning, and most of our members locally work in the building surveying and quantity surveying disciplines of the profession, and also in valuation, land and property services and commercial property. The profile of our businesses and members are largely that of small and medium enterprises, which reflects the wider economy. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Matthew, who will talk about the whole life carbon assessments before we take any questions. Matthew, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Emmett, and good morning, everybody. Again, I'll just echo what Emmett said. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. So yes, by way of a kind of a conscious of the time we've got here, so I won't go into sort of masses of detail, but please, as Emmett said, we've got time for questions at the end, so please ask away then. But to give a sort of a bit of a context to what I'm here to talk about today, obviously climate change, we all know the importance of it, what it is. Obviously, we've recently had COP26 where some further targets were set around reduction of global emissions, and construction and infrastructure are one of the sort of main contributors to those emissions. So one of the tools and techniques that we have at the RICS, we have a document called, as it says there, the Whole Life Carbon Assessment for the Built Environment. And to sort of run through the points that are on the slide there, what is it? Well, it's a professional statement that provides requirements and supporting guidance for conducting whole life carbon assessments for construction projects. And what does that really mean? So the European standard, which is EN 15978, essentially sets out the technical detail for how a carbon life cycle assessment is undertaken on a construction or infrastructure project, and that sets out the methodology for how that's done. And so our professional statement takes that information and puts it into a kind of a user-friendly way. I hesitate to use the word friendly, but a user way that our members and other industry professionals can actually undertake a life cycle assessment, which ultimately determines the amount of carbon emissions that project will emit into the atmosphere throughout its life, hence the whole life part of the title. And so again, to put that into a bit of context, the built environment is responsible for 40% of global carbon emissions. So we're talking about a huge chunk of the emissions that we emit on an annual basis. 28% of those are from operational emissions, and by operational we're talking about the day-to-day energy use in heating, ventilation, power, water consumption, and all the things that the building does on a day-to-day basis. But 11%, still a very high percentage from what are called embodied carbon emissions, and those are essentially the emissions extracted in or the emissions put into the atmosphere from the extraction, production, procurement, and installation of the material. So before the building's even occupied, a sizable proportion of carbon has been emitted into the atmosphere, and what the industry needs to focus on is those embodied carbon emissions. There's a lot of assessment and a lot of mechanisms for measuring the operational carbon emissions, some that you may be familiar with, such as BREEAM and LEED, which are able to monitor and measure and benchmark operational emissions. But in terms of embodied carbon, there's very little in terms of how that's measured. And so our whole life carbon assessment professional statement allows practitioners and organisations to actually understand what the whole life carbon emissions are on their project or their assets or their infrastructure project. And in terms of some real life examples, so that I could just put this in a bit of context for you. Our professional statement has been mandated by the Greater London Authority here in England, so that all planning applications are required to have a whole life carbon assessment undertaken in terms of our whole life carbon assessment professional statement. There is no other tool available to them. They have to use ours. It's an international tool, and another example, another recent adoption of ours is in Singapore, where the Buildings and Construction Authority have mandated the use of our whole life carbon professional statement in their green mark scheme, which is them trying to achieve, the Buildings and Construction Authority trying to achieve 80% of buildings by floor area to be green by 2030. So it very much is an international professional statement. And the point on the slide there where we've put, does it lead to more retrofit and reuse than new building, is a very sort of modern way of thinking about this. And what our professional statement does, it allows practitioners to understand if actually the new, constructing a new asset is the right way to go, or would actually the reuse of an existing asset be more appropriate in respect to carbon. And the last point there, gateway into ICMS 3. ICMS 3 is an acronym for International Cost Management Standard version 3. And very quickly, that is, we are part of RSS is part of a group of 50 global organisations, standard setting bodies, etc. They've got together and produced this document. As the 3 suggest there, we're now into version 3. And essentially what that does is something that's never been achieved before. It's a global standard that allows not only cost, but carbon to be reported, measured and benchmarked in a consistent way across projects and assets and infrastructure globally. So you can compare not only the cost of an airport in the UK, you can very easily compare that against an airport in Australia or Singapore or America or wherever. And ICMS 3 allows those benchmarks to be done both against cost and carbon, which is absolutely critical in terms of turning the conversation around the cost of carbon. So it allows very easily a way to see the cost of certain materials, certain methodologies of construction, and also the carbon outputs of those materials and those methodologies. So very easily you can see, you can influence design decisions to be able to adapt to your carbon output versus your cost trade-offs to make carbon as much a part of the conversation as cost. And as I say, this whole life carbon assessment is very much applicable to all types of construction and infrastructure projects. So kind of one in Northern Ireland, obviously it's the Weaver Cross development. This would be absolutely perfect for understanding what the carbon output of that project would be at any stage. It can be used in new or existing buildings and assets. It takes the user through a stage-by-stage guide in respect to how those calculations are done, and ultimately an output is given in respect to the carbon emissions. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Emmett. Thank you. So, moving on from essentially our professional statement, there's some more text there about what it is we do as an organisation in respect to this area. So at the top, obviously, we've got, as I've just spoken about, whole life carbon assessment and ICMS 3, lower life cycle costing in terms of our recently issued cost prediction professional statement, the value-led procurement and project delivery in respect to the recently UK government issued value toolkit. There's a few others there as well, and I think it's probably important for me to just say quickly, again, I'm conscious of time, is that our whole life carbon assessment professional statement is part of a kind of a three-pronged approach to how the RRCS views carbon assessment. So we have ICMS 3, which is the kind of the repository or the database or the reporting system. So that's kind of the what, the how in terms of how do you populate that is the whole life carbon assessment professional statement. So that's the calculation method for how do you undertake that assessment, and that gives you the data to put into your ICMS3 report, and then that's further captured in the RCS built environment carbon database, which is recently being updated, and that will allow anyone to access that database, and that will obviously contain benchmarks of both projects and specific product level information in respect to the carbon output of that project or product, to allow that to be further used on further reports. So this is very much about the life cycle of a carbon assessment. It's not purely at a point in time. This is intended to be used on very much on an ongoing basis, because obviously carbon is, you know, the most important measurement of a building going forward, or a built asset going forward. And as the RICS's motto says, you can't manage something that can't be measured. So this is very much about having that information available for everybody to understand the implications of a particular carbon intensity of a project versus its cost, so that those trade-offs can be discussed, understood, and made at an appropriate stage. Thank you, Emma. So again, this continues on the theme of the last slide, talking about you know, the RSS's approach to sustainability. And again, we've got some further solutions there, that in terms of what the RICS is involved with, and what we, you know, how we are approaching this this area. A number of those I've touched on previously: ICMS3, Value Toolkit, Whole Life Carbon Database. And then there's some others in areas outside of construction and infrastructure, such as IBOS, which is International Building Operating Standard, which again is how a building's efficiency is measured, essentially, and its performance by the users that are actually using that building. An ESG programme, Environmental Sustainability and Governance, and there's several others as well. But I'm obviously very conscious of time today, so I won't talk about those any further. But please, very much thank you for your time, and Emmett and I will happily answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Emmett, for your presentation. Certainly very interesting, given the times that we're in relation to just post COP26. Could I ask? So obviously, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors are given by your presentation, are very aware of whole life carbon assessment, and have fitted that around much of what they do now in terms of going forward. But I want to know, maybe get a feel for whether or not prospective clients, are as aware of the carbon life assessment, and if so, what evidence is there to back that up?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. One of our aims as an organisation is to, you know, increase adoption of our standards, and we can only do that through the help of our members. So whilst we put out this documentation and a professional statement, you know, it's ultimately for our members, who are the ones that work on a day-to-day basis with organisations in respect to, you know, implementing these standards and this guidance. But equally, we do a lot of work with governments and other non-governmental organisations in respect to, you know, the benefits to them of our standards, and this is one. And to answer your question in short, there's a lot of you know, the carbon agenda, if you like, has a huge spotlight on it at present, as you've just alluded to. So there's a lot of interest in this, and that will only increase. So our current professional statement was published in 2017, and we now know that it's, you know, through conversations we've had, we now know it's it is the preeminent methodology for carbon measurement globally. But we don't end there. So it's currently in a process of being updated to ensure it meets the needs of the profession moving forward. And in terms of the evidence, the two examples I gave you are just two of many. So the fact it's been adopted by a Greater London Authority here in England, and it's a mandated requirement for all planning application or referable planning applications as part of the London Plan policy. So that's all buildings of a certain size or a certain scope. The Singaporean Green Mark. There's a number of organisations that are adopting this, and there's a number of organisations. There are other ways and means of measuring carbon, and there are others out there that we know are in use. But we know that ours is the most widely used through organisations, particularly developer organisations, because they realise that this is an increasingly important area for them to demonstrate their not necessarily compliance with, but to demonstrate that they are responsible organisations. It goes further than that. There's now sort of green funding, so funding for buildings doesn't get potentially given unless it can be demonstrated to meet a certain level of whole life carbon assessment and things like that. So there's plenty of evidence out there in respect to, we know this is being used and we can see the importance of it. And the two examples I'll give you are just sort of some of many, and I'm more than happy to follow up with some further information if that helps after today.
No, okay. And just finally from me, so what importance do clients, developers, and ultimately the end users place on the supply chain in relation to carbon life assessments or life carbon assessments, particularly surrounding the damaging emissions from particular countries, large suppliers such as China, for example? Does that factor into the consideration?
Sorry, I just missed the first part of your question there. Can you just say that again? Sorry. Yeah,
so you understand what I'm coming at in relation to the supply chain, particularly the damaging emissions from the likes of countries like China, who are a large part of the supply chain, particularly with relation to steel and other components. What importance do clients, developers, and ultimately the end user of those buildings place on the supply chain in relation to carbon life assessment?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what this is all about. And that's ultimately, the construction industry for too many years has ultimately been, particularly when you're talking about developers, has been focused on the bottom line, i.e. what a building's going to cost them, and they've not always been focused on the green credentials, if you like, or the carbon output. Whereas now, I think that is changing somewhat, particularly in certain areas of the world, and the UK being probably the leader of that, or certainly Europe being the leader of that. And I think there is very much an emphasis on, as I say, now the embodied carbon of an asset. So whilst it's very easy to sort of demonstrate an operational efficiency of a building and to kind of for people to say how wonderful their building is in terms of its energy performance from a day-to-day basis, that really isn't enough, because we now know, as I say, with the statistics I gave that the embodied carbon is only the embodied carbon of a project is only going to increase by logic. If the operational emissions go down, the embodied carbon goes up. So organisations have to look for ways to mitigate that, and by undertaking these life cycle assessments at an earlier stage and understanding what the impact is of importing materials from China, for example, or from wherever, that obviously will have a huge carbon intensity just from the travelling alone. So things like that will have a huge impact on ultimately the numbers that are churned out. And I think some of this is a little bit self-serving. So when these when these assessments are ultimately, compared, if you like, developers and organisations will be very keen to be, nearer the top of that leaderboard than the bottom. So there's a number of practices that organisations can do. There's a number of ways that materials can be utilised to have a lower carbon intensity and a lower carbon output. So I think there'll be as this gains momentum, and ultimately, we're beginning to see the beginnings of this being mandated by law in statute. So there will come a time when, some of these things actually ultimately become legally required. And whilst I appreciate we're not there yet, it is growing in importance, and it is growing in awareness that organisations need to recognise this and need to factor it into their investment decisions.
Okay, thank you. I'll go on to questions. Cathal Boylan, please. Okay, we'll wait for Cathal Boylan.
Hello, Chair. Yeah, you in now? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Cathal.
Yes.
Okay. Matthew, thanks very much. Just continuing on there, I mean, clearly, although some people will argue that COP26, some countries copped out of it, but we still have our own role and responsibility. And I'm just following on from what you were saying there, because clearly, not only the executive, but every department here has responsibility to not only deliver its public contracts, but also to look at maybe some measures in terms of regulation or legislation. And just from our own infrastructure point of view, I mean, as a committee, what should we be focusing on in terms of to mitigate, our carbon footprint and to buy into the whole life carbon assessment? Because I mean, the terminology changed, but we all know what we're trying to do here. You know what I mean? And we're keen to move forward. So just from an infrastructural committee point of view, what can we do collectively?
It's a very good question, Cathal, and I think the first thing that hopefully you could do is through your the people that you've got working with you, your consultants or internal people or whoever, is have a look at some form of assessment. So understanding what it is on a project like Weavers Cross. I appreciate that's not a straightforward exercise given the complexity of it, but it's possible, and there's a number of our professional statement sets out the how, but there's a number of software tools that make that process somewhat easier. One of the most popular ones is something called Click Lca. It's a one-click life cycle assessment, which very straightforwardly can give you an understanding of what the carbon output of a particular process or a particular product or an asset, or whether it's a road or a bridge or something as complex as Weaver Cross and all the interlinking areas of that, can give you an understanding of what the potential carbon output of that is. And then you can then start to understand where there's potential for lowering that carbon output. So it may be that you look at more or less carbon intensive materials or less carbon intensive processes for undertaking the project. So I think an initial step would be to, again, whether that's through your internal staff or through an external consultant or advisor, would be to perhaps understand what your baseline is currently in respect to a particular project or a particular piece of work that you're looking to undertake, and understand what the likely carbon output of that is, and then then have discussions with designers and engineers around actually how that can be improved upon, if indeed it needs to be improved upon, and how you can go about that.
No, thank you. And someday, obviously, Chair, we'll take a look at and have a conversation with the department in terms of how we move forward. Just another final question in terms of, obviously, transport plays a key role, for ourselves here in terms of, you've seen now the likes of the hydrogen and the new current technologies, electric vehicles and everything else. I mean, your views on that and what we can do in relation to that there, because I mean, if we're serious, we've talked to the likes of QPA and different delivery mechanisms within the construction sector, but certainly transport's one of our key elements in terms of the committee. Just your views on how we can move forward in relation to the transport sector.
The transport sector in respect to construction, or transport sector generally?
In respect of construction itself, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so again, obviously, those sorts of the emissions from the transporting of materials are very much included within a life cycle assessment when it's undertaken. So there are, rather than necessarily needing to be overly specific about things, there's some benchmark data out there from various organisations around the likely carbon impact of particular transport scenarios, which again are an easy place to start to understand what the likely carbon output is, and then again, it's around understanding the methodologies, so just-in-time deliveries and all things that will impact on ultimately on that carbon output. And again, you fit on there. Ultimately, the one probably of most significance is, do you need that transport at all, or can it by a less carbon invasive way? So hydrogen, being probably the ultimate one to being achievable, albeit we're some way off that being a more regular occurrence. But yeah, again, it's about very much. A lot of this is about understanding, where you stand currently, and then working through ways in which that can be improved upon. And that's not to say that everything can be improved upon. Sometimes the technology just does not exist for things to be improved at this time. But yeah, you need to understand where you are currently, and then it's a case of breaking those processes down and understand what can be done to ultimately, lower the carbon output.
Martin, thanks very much. The conversation has well and truly begun, but thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Could
I go to? Sorry.
If I might.
Could I go to Patrick Delargy for a question? Oh, sorry, I don't. Oh, I'm sorry. You want to come in on that?
Yes, I was just going to say, I suppose what really kind of pulls all this together, Chair, is the idea. We understand that carbon has a cost to the environment, and I suppose what we're moving towards is a position where we maybe see carbon as having a price, which is a price that we can then use to understand the environmental impacts that the carbon emissions have. And
absolutely, Emma. Yeah, and again, that's yeah.
And what kind of Matthew and RCS are kind of saying is that we need to look at the assets that we have and that we are building, and try and understand better just the complete picture around the carbon emissions that those generate. So whether it is in the design and construction, we probably are reasonably well sighted on, but how far into the supply chain do we go to have the fullest possible picture of the carbon emissions which those buildings generate? And by understanding that better, we can make better decisions around what we invest and how we invest in the built environment.
Okay, thank you. Patrick Delargy for a question.
Thank you for the briefing, and I know your briefing talks about the carbon emissions from actually producing materials, and I'm conscious Jonathan has already asked some of these questions, but it was just a point on, obviously we need to look at developing a circular economy and reusing materials where we can. So on that, what's your thinking on the circular economy in terms of construction and materials?
That's an excellent question. And yeah, the thinking very much is that the circular economy needs to be fully considered. So again, not designing buildings and not designing that need to be essentially demolished at the end of their life. You need to be thinking about designing them with reuse in mind. So how can they be, rather than simply demolished, how can they be taken apart where those materials can be reused? And there's a number of ways you can go about that. But again, it all very much starts in your design stage. So understanding how your building is put together, how it basically down to how it's joined together things as fundamental as that, and the materials that you use that will have a reuse at the end of the building's natural life and won't need to be, demolished and ultimately creating further carbon emissions by doing so. And so, yeah, absolutely, that is what this process is very much about, is the circular economy and how your asset actually, when it comes to the end of its life, isn't simply gone. It's very much either refurbished or reused or taken apart, and those materials recycled essentially, whether that's into another building or another asset or into another purpose. That absolutely is key in all of this, because there's little point in talking about all of this if only you're going to get to the end of a simply demolish it and that process basically produce a whole lot of carbon that kind of undoes a lot of the good work that you've done through the life of the asset.
No, that's brilliant. And just on a second question then, obviously you talked about the whole life carbon approach, and obviously that does try to avoid and help to avoid any unintended consequences of focusing on operational emissions alone. So have there been any incidents that you're aware of where there have been unintended consequences despite the good intentions to reduce carbon?
The connection went slightly there. Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
So it was just, I know you talked around the whole life carbon approach, and that helps to avoid any unintended consequences of focusing on operational emissions alone. So have there been any incidents that you're aware of where there were unintended consequences despite the good intentions of trying to reduce carbon?
I can't give you any sort of specific measurable examples, but I think the number of the kind of the go-to mechanism that we have, not just in the UK but worldwide really, is and in inverted commas cheaper. We knock a building down. Look, it's potential reuse or refurbishment. And one thing we're currently investigating, and one thing that's becoming more and more prevalent, hopefully, is something called a pre-demolition audit. So that's as the name suggests, it's prior to a building that's been earmarked for demolition. Actually, it's measured in a fully itemised way in respect to what it is essentially you're looking to demolish. So all of the parts of the building are quantified out, and they are then given a rating, if you like, as to whether or not they can be refurbished or recycled or whatever, or ultimately if a new version of said product, whether it's a piece of concrete or some masonry or some steel, and all of that is rated to ultimately determine whether or not actually the right thing to do would be to demolish the building rather than it, because of the amount of carbon that you would expend in said demolition. So I can't give you any specific examples of where a demolition's gone ahead and ultimately it's been categorically proven to be the wrong decision from a carbon perspective. But all I would say is it's not always right and demolish and rebuild. Each case needs to be considered based on what that building constructed, what it's intended to replace it.
Okay, I think it's probably getting harder to follow.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's answered my question, really, and I think that's a really useful and an interesting proposal, so thanks very much for your answers.
Okay, thank you. We have a final question from Roy Beggs. Could I ask Mr. Collins, could you please maybe go off your camera, because there's a significant disruption on the line. We can't hear some of the responses, so perhaps if you disable your video, that will enable us to hear clearly the answer. So I'll go to Roy Beggs for the question.
Again, thanks for this discussion in this important area. It is important to look at the ultimate lifetime usage of a building, etc., and its costs and carbon requirements. But you've said that in looking at the lifetime emissions, you look at the maintenance, repair, replacement, and then the ultimate demolition and disposal. One of the aspects that there has been discussion about recently relevant to new buildings is provision of electric charging points. There to be no more petrol and diesel cars after 2030, and no more hybrids after 2035. And in terms of a building which lasts much longer than even that, that is now appearing really within the window of our existing buildings usage, as already there's significant movement towards electric vehicles. So my question is, have you assessed the carbon efficiency as well as the cost efficiency of having to retrofit electric charging points into new development, or whether they should be installed at the build stage today?
The sound went out slightly there, but so forgive me if I'm answering the wrong question. But I believe what you said is, basically the carbon efficiency of installing electric charging points been measured, versus not installing them essentially over the lifetime of the building. That's not something that we at the RSS have done specifically, but I'm pretty sure it's something that will have been done and can be done on a case-by-case basis, if that makes sense. So I'm sure that the benefits of the electric charging points over the life of a building have been assessed, and again, a lot of that will be determined on each individual building type. Probably that this isn't this process isn't a one-size-fits-all, if you like. It does need to be undertaken on each individual case. While there's a number of benchmarks and benchmark data available, that will only obviously apply in the circumstances it will apply to. Each individual project wouldn't need, a life cycle assessment being undertaken on its own. And I'll probably just finish by saying, giving one kind of statistic is that, as I'm sure you've all probably seen when carbon is being talked about recently, that if we're talking about improving the energy efficiency of existing residential buildings, it's important to note that something like 70 or 80% of the buildings that will be in use in 2050, when we're hopefully going to hit net zero, will be those that are existing today. So there's a huge undertaking required to make existing buildings a lot more energy efficient, as opposed to just concentrating on new buildings. So there's a whole piece of work that needs to be done about how that process is undertaken and what that process requires. And so, there's a lot more that needs to be done than and we're very conscious that we're generally talking about a life cycle assessment being undertaken on a building. Those sorts of things need to absolutely be undertaken on existing buildings as well, if we're going to reach the targets that we've set ourselves.
Just with your oversight of development widely, are you aware, are there many locations where electric charging points are being installed because of updated building regulations? That is not currently a requirement, I'm aware of, in Northern Ireland, but are there other places where it is?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? The connection went
Okay.
there.
Are you aware, with your oversight of buildings widely, are you aware, have building regulations been updated in other places to require the charging points to be installed? At present in Northern Ireland, that's not the case.
No, well, I'm aware that there's regulations are changing here in England. Obviously, you know, it's different in all of the devolved nations, but regulations are changing, and it's currently been discussed that charging points will be required on all residential properties from 20, I believe it's the middle of this decade or so. But I'm not aware of any specific. Obviously, building regulations are changing in respect to, you know, Part L in respect of energy efficiency in general. But what that will look like ultimately, we're not quite sure yet. But electric charging points will just be one part of that wider discussion, wider, you know, remit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have no. I do have one more further question from Liz Kimmon, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I've been intermittent in this as well, so apologies if this has been already answered. It was just in relation to construction. Obviously, it's, you know, it's vital if we want to deliver the badly needed infrastructure and improve connectivity, particularly in more deprived areas and rural areas. But we do need to see decarbonisation of the sector as well while it's delivering for communities. So I suppose it's just to get an indication of what strides have construction made recently to try and tackle their carbon footprint, and what do we see as the biggest challenges. And I suppose, I mean, how do you think that the total carbon principle should be integrated into the design and procurement and the process end of construction as well? So apologies, some of this has already been covered, but signal's been pretty bad here as well, and I'm being intermittent. So thank you, Chair.
I know the question has been covered in part, but if you want to have some final comments on that, Mr. Collins, but I'd ask you please to be brief, because the committee does have other business before it has to conclude.
The connection broke up quite a lot there, but yeah, I mean, very quickly, I'll just say, yeah, the construction industry is making huge strides around this, and I think some of that again comes in part to, you know, constructions are very much a commercial business, and organisations are recognising that you know, this needs addressing, and targets are set, and before any sort of statutory regulations come in that actually mandate this to them, they are sort of getting ahead of the curve. But I think in terms of the biggest challenges, ultimately, again, construction has a tendency to really, particularly from a private sector perspective, to always kind of race to the bottom line. So it's all about the cost as opposed to anything else. So there's a culture change that has to happen to make this work. I think that hopefully is, you know, through things like, you know, COP26, albeit, you know, didn't probably achieve what we wanted it to achieve, but you know, targets are set, and it's becoming more important that the construction sector plays its part in achieving those targets. So yeah, progress is being made, and now it's about accelerating that progress to decarbonisation, and ultimately, you know, the built environment is a huge influence on carbon emissions. So, you know, we need to lead this and prove that it can be done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Liz. Okay, can I thank Mr. Collins and Mr. McDonough-Brown for your presentation this morning. Much useful. Thank you very much. The committee will now move on with its business. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and apologies for the breakup of the communication.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, members. I suppose just to note, we did have some considerable technical difficulties there with the line. I'm not sure what that is, but we'll certainly inquire about that after the meeting. I'm not sure whether it was on our side or whether it was on the other. So, okay, I'm sure it wasn't us, so that's fair enough. Okay, members, agenda item number 10, which is the Forward Work Programme. Could I draw members' attention to the proposed draft Forward Work Programme at page 101, draft Forward Work Programme. members will see there, and I suppose it ties in well with the briefing in relation to the water subsidy, in relation to, we have a departmental briefing next week with the budget outcome of the October monitoring and round and 3-year budgeting. We also have, and it's to be confirmed yet, but potential for a briefing from Northern Ireland Water on the outcome of impact of final determination. That may not happen, members, but I'm certainly keen that we hear from NI Water before the committee at the earliest opportunity. The following week we will have a briefing at ABC Council in relation to infrastructure issues and the particular focus on rail infrastructure. I know members like myself, you're probably being tagged continually now on particular rail proposals, particularly about lack of rail to the west of the province. That's something certainly that I think members would find useful to hear further presentations in relation to the rail network and proposals going forward. So I think we can have that discussion on that meeting of the 8th. Followed by that, there will be the opportunity for members who wish to avail of further visits in the area. And following that, we did have potential for a departmental briefing from from a ministerial briefing, sorry. But unfortunately, that now can't happen as the minister is no longer available to attend the briefing, as there's an executive event arranged for that date. But the briefing will be arranged with the minister at the earliest convenience, hopefully for January. So it's just to bring members' attention to that in the forward work programme. I see Liz Kimmon's hand raised. Is that from before? Oh, it is from before. Okay, we will move to any other business.
It's not.
Well, it's not as on this issue, Liz. You want to raise?
Sorry, no, I thought I put lowered it. Apologies.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, Cathal Boylan on the forward work programme.
No, Chair, on AOB.
Okay, I'll come to you in a moment. So, agenda item number 11, which is any other business. So, have members any other business they wish to raise? So, I'll go to Cathal Boylan first.
Chair, yeah, I'm sure I've been contacted, many of us have been contacted by the Lca partnership in relation to, obviously, the opportunity in terms of economy, tourism and the environmental issues, and there is a role and responsibility for DFA, and it's clearly I would like the committee to receive a briefing from them to see how we can work with them to sort of develop that, because I mean they seem to be getting nowhere in terms of what the department's responsibilities are. So I would put a request in to have them before the committee to see exactly how we can assist or how we can help. You know, I mean, I know they're working right across the councils in relation to this, but I think there's a role and responsibility there for DFA. So just want to try and find that up and marry that up and see what's going on, Chair.
Okay, well, I will point out that I did raise this at the strategic away day in relation to the correspondence with Lca partnership, but members decided that they didn't wish to have them for a physical briefing. So it was whether or not they would be included in this stakeholder engagement session, which I think they are. For the 15th. For the 15th December. So that will be an opportunity for the Lca partnership and other stakeholder groups that have tried to engage with the committee but due to COVID have been unable to, and it also, members thought, would enable the committee with its physical briefings scheduled in to keep in line with our strategic aims and objectives as set out in the strategic away day. So that's why they have corresponded over. They had a request in for a committee briefing session for many months ago, but that was decided at the committee strategic planning day. I'll let you come back on that.
No, I appreciate that, Chair. I mean, clearly, that was fine at the time, and I mean, I'll respect your decision on it. What I will say is, clearly there's roles from Mid-Ulster, ABC and others, but I mean, they seem they don't get any answers anywhere. That's the only reason I asked in that respect. But if they come to the stakeholder event, maybe we'll engage there, and if there needs anything arise from that, I'll be happy enough to go down that route. But it's just things have moved on from we had that debate. That's all, Chair. No. But I respect that decision. Thank you.
No, that's fair enough. No, I had actually thought at the time that it would be useful to have them for a physical committee meeting, but the consensus was otherwise, that we would keep with the broad themes. So as Chair, I respect that consensus, and hopefully they can have the opportunity to engage via the stakeholder engagement event, and if members after that feel that it's still worthwhile for a further briefing, we can consider it in due course. Patrick Delargy for a question.
Yeah, it's just on AOB as well, two issues that I wanted to raise. One was within my own constituency. It's along the Foyle Road stretch. I'd been working with Councillor Patricia Logue in the area, and we had invited officials out to see the site. There's regular flooding at the site, so we had wanted a resolution to this. But all that the officials said could be done was that either manholes be put in or sandbags be put in place. Now, to me, that's not acceptable, that's the only solution that can be put in place. There needs to be something much more radical done to tackle this issue, and I know I have brought it before the committee before as well, but I think we really need to be looking at that. You know, it's having a huge impact on the community, on the infrastructure, particularly on the roads, and on house prices as well, so it's something that we really need to tackle. There was another suggestion that I had as well, just around a separate issue. I know Liz and myself had both been contacted on numerous occasions this week about the state of the roads that in many areas, particularly within Derry, and Liz had said the same in her constituency, that, you know, companies are coming in and doing a bit of work to a road, patching it up, but that is insufficient. So it was just around that, if we could write maybe to the department or the minister to raise these concerns and just inquire around the quality assessment of the repairs, because to me, it doesn't seem to be efficient at the minute.
Okay, and 2 points, because I know, Patrick, you're relatively new to the committee, but normally with any other business, we don't get into specific constituency queries. So on the first point, I would ask you probably to bring that up via, your point's on the record, but I would ask you probably to bring that up via alternative means. In relation to the roads, that's a very legitimate question, and that can tie in very much with our scrutiny of the legal disputes in relation to road contracts, which affect both the areas in which you suggested, and I know we will have further information on that once the internal inquiry is carried out, and the lack of investment. It's one of our key priority themes, is the road infrastructure and the continued road maintenance, so I think we will have a potential session to engage on that, but on the constituency issue, it's not an issue for the committee.
No, that's fine. Just on the interim, could we write just to the minister around that, because obviously it's an issue that is really pressing. I know there's been a huge amount recently. Would members agree with that?
I think we could certainly write off in relation to the roads maintenance issue that you've mentioned.
No, of course, that's
we can certainly do it on that issue. Roy Biggs.
I would just like to highlight, I've been on a number of occasions pointing out there's insufficient resurfacing budget. It's the lack of budget that is given to the department and the lack of funding directed towards resurfacing rather than new build projects. So we are getting the result of the budget is what we're getting. Which
we'll have ample opportunity to discuss next week when we have a departmental briefing on the budget aspect. Okay, Cathal Boylan. And members, I would ask also, remember, any other business should be supplied to the committee chair prior to the meeting, but I'm giving a considerable bit of leniency here because members wish to bring up particular points, but please let's not try to stray into local constituency issues.
Sorry, Chair, and I'll put it in writing in the future, Chair. Just on Padraig's point, I mean, Chair, can we write then to the department, ask the department's responsibility in the quality of reinstatements right across the whole of the area, because it's happening right across the board. It's not just specific to Derry. The level of reinstatements in some of the utility operators is not good, and ask the department what's the roles and responsibilities and their assessment of it, and also what engagement do they have with the utility companies when they're going to do roads and resurface roads. I have seen roads brand new, spanking new done, and the next thing a utility comes down that road, it doesn't matter who it is. So maybe we could couch the question in a different manner and ask the department its role and responsibilities in one, the level of reinstatements and the quality of them, and also the engagement that you have with utility companies in regards to that.
That's a fair enough question, and particularly the engagement. I am aware that I think there's a working group, and I think that's as far as it goes, but certainly I do share your concern regarding new stretches of road and then work scheduled in months down the line. It sort of defeats the purpose. So I think there is an element of disjointment there that should be addressed. So we can ask that question and seek further clarity on that matter. Okay, members, no other members wish to raise any other items of business. So I will move on to agenda item number 12, which is date, time and location of the next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 1st of December 2021 in the Senate Chamber of Parliament buildings. Could I advise members in the room of the need to maintain social distancing while leaving the meeting to ensure that they remove all their own paper, water bottles, glasses, etc. from the meeting? And can I thank members for their participation this morning? The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29.